Chapter 6. The Men's Movement. What does it mean to be a man?
The women's movement has gained a lot of attention in recent years in the U.S. and in countries around the world. As you heard in the last lecture, the women's movement has inspired many women to fight for equal rights and treatment in their homes, their personal relationships, and at work. It has also forced many women to examine and to rethink the roles they play in society. However, not only have women begun to examine and rethink the roles they play at home and work, and in modern society as a whole, but men also have begun to examine and rethink the roles they play in society, and to examine and rethink the various and changing roles they must play at home and at work today. Men have also begun to react in both positive and negative ways to the new expectations they must meet at home and work. Some men are adjusting well to the new roles that they must play as more and more women enter the job market. And some men are pleased that their wives and partners have jobs outside the home. However, some of the role changes men are having to make to accommodate their working wives and girlfriends, and some of the new expectations concerning their masculinity are causing some of them a good deal of stress, anger, and confusion. Some men are even asking the question, what does it mean to be a real man in today's world? Many are confused about how they should treat women, whether these women are their female colleagues at work, their friends, or their wives. Some feel they are no longer king of the castle at home. As a result of this confusion and unhappiness, a counter-movement called the men's movement has sprung up alongside the women's movement in the United States. Men in the movement seek to provide one another with support that they need to cope with the stresses and strains of being a man in today's world, and to cope with the stresses and strains brought about by the professional advances made and the personal freedoms won by women in many countries over the past few decades. Some women view the men's movement as a backlash against the professional advances women have made and the personal freedoms they have won as a result of the women's movement. Many men, therefore, and many women also, see the men's movement as men's need to form a brotherhood for psychological support, just as women have formed support groups with other women. Others see the men's movement as men's attempt and need to understand more fully what it means and takes to be a real man at the start of the 21st century, when traditional definitions of manhood are changing or are under attack in many countries around the world. To begin this discussion of some of the catalysts for the men's movement, I'll say just a few words about why some women consider the men's movement a reaction against the women's movement, what the well-known author Susan Faludi calls the backlash against the women's movement. Ms. Faludi suggests that some men feel that women are becoming too independent and powerful today as a result of the professional advances they've made in the workplace and because of the personal freedoms they have gained in their family and personal relationships. She notes that the resentment of some men toward women's gaining power is not a recent phenomenon. More than 1900 years ago, the women of Rome tried to repeal a law that forbade them from riding in horse-drawn chariots and from wearing multicolored dresses. In 195 BCE, the Roman senator Cato expressed the fear and concern that the women of Rome had become so powerful that the independence of the men of Rome had been lost in their homes and was being trampled underfoot in public. In her book titled Backlash, The Undeclared War Against American Women, Susan Faludi points out that many men today still resent women's progress in becoming independent personally and professionally. Faludi notes that a 7-year survey of American male attitudes in the 1980s found that no more than 5 to 10% of the men surveyed genuinely supported women's demands for independence and equality. It is likely that this attitude has not changed much today. Although some women view the men's movement as a backlash, many others see the men's movement as something that is good for both men and women. They see it as men's need to form a brotherhood for psychological support to protect their rights and personal freedoms, even as women form support groups with other women to protect and advance their rights. They think, for example, that women should not automatically be given custody of children when a divorce occurs, and yet this is what happens in the United States today. Finally, some authorities relate the development of the men's movement to the confusion created by the crisis of masculinity in contemporary society and the many and changing images portrayed in the popular media of who and what real men are and how they are supposed to act. If you watch American movies, you might find yourself asking, is the real man, for example, a sensitive guy like Dustin Hoffman's Tootsie? Is he an involved dad like Robin Williams' Mrs. Doubtfire? Or the father played by Steve Martin in Parenthood? A macho man like Arnold Schwarzenegger plays in The Terminator? Or is he a caring nurturer like the man Schwarzenegger played in Kindergarten Cop? Many men are searching for answers to this question and are attempting to find answers from the leaders of the men's movement. What are the origins of this crisis of masculinity that poses problems for many men today? Well, one of the historical reasons for the crisis, according to Robert Bly, a poet who is considered to be one of the founding fathers of the men's movement, is rooted in the changes that took place in the U.S. as a result of the Industrial Revolution, which occurred in the early to mid-1900s. When the Industrial Revolution began, the kinds of work that people did, that is, the kinds of work men did, of course, changed for many Americans. Before the Civil War, 88% of American males were small farmers, independent artisans, or small business owners. In these professions, the workers usually worked close to their homes. This meant that sons were constantly learning how to work and support themselves and their family by working alongside their fathers. By 1910, however, less than 1/3 of all men in the United States were self-employed. Sociologist Michael Kimmel points out that even then, many men felt that the concept of manhood was being threatened and was even vanishing because men no longer worked their land or had control over their labor. Many never got to see the fruits of their labor, as farmers and craftsmen usually do. Many men in the post-industrial revolution era had become mere cogs in the machines of industrial America. In addition, the change from a farm to an industrial society meant that instead of supporting their families by working near their homes as farmers, craftsmen, or small business owners, the majority of men began working in factories or offices. Often, the factories were far from their homes, and men had to travel long distances to work. This meant that the men were not home, and the amount of time fathers spent with their sons was greatly reduced. Young boys, therefore, did not have their fathers around to act as role models. The effects of the Industrial Revolution continue into the present day, according to men in the men's movement, and they want to address the problems it has brought. For example, many people are concerned that men still have little say in the upbringing of their children. The evolution of the women's movement had a profound effect on the development of the men's movement. As a result of the women's movement, more women are working outside the home, and many men are playing a more active role in family life, and they are taking on some of the tasks involved in childcare and housework. 30 to 40 years ago, care of the home and children was almost exclusively the responsibility of women. In addition to these changes inside the home, in the workplace, men are today entering occupations that used to be considered women's jobs. More men are becoming nurses and teachers of young children. Other men are finding that they have more female colleagues and bosses at work than ever before. And they're having to adapt to women's styles of communication and management, which can differ considerably from those of men. At work, as well as at home, many men today in the U.S. have to play very different roles than their fathers did. As a result, they are joining with other men in the men's movement, or they are reading books such as Robert Bly's Iron John to try to understand and cope with the roles expected of men in today's world. So some of the reasons for the men's movement can be attributed to three things. One, the changing roles brought about by the women's movement. Two, the Industrial Revolution. And 3, men's desire to understand and affirm the concept of manhood. Exactly what forms does the men's movement take? And what do men in the men's movement hope to achieve by being active in the movement? To begin with, the men's movement has no unified, monolithic philosophy. Although there are a number of unifying themes, there are also some interesting differences between the basic groups associated with the men's movement. Several writers who write about the men's movement have identified 4 basic groups of men active in the movement. The first group is labeled the male feminists, and these men work for women's rights and equality between the sexes. Some of the men in this first group are vocal about blaming other men for much of the violence against women and for the inequality that exists between men and women in relationships and in the job market. Not all members of the men's movement, however, consider this first group of men to be an integral part of the men's movement. To be sure, the other 3 groups focus more on men's issues than do the so-called male feminists. The second orientation in the men's movement attracts men who join men's support groups to meet regularly and give and receive psychological support in dealing with problems created by the new roles they have to play at home and at work. These men are attempting to learn to better express their feelings and emotions and to show sensitivity without being ashamed. A third group in the men's movement consists of men who want to get back the power they feel they've lost because of the advances made by women as a result of the women's movement and feminist causes. Finally, there is an approach to the movement called the mythopoetic men's movement. The mythopoetic men's movement is often identified with Robert Bly, the poet who wrote one of the most well-known books of the men's movement, Iron John. The men involved in this aspect of the men's movement believe that men should be initiated into manhood as men were initiated when people still lived in small tribes and bands and ancient cultures. Now, this group initiates men using mythology, poetry, hence the name mythopoetic, and other rituals such as dancing to explore and affirm the value of masculinity and masculine approaches to problem solving. Men who subscribe to this viewpoint worry that too much contact with women and too little contact with other men has turned them into weaklings or wimps. So the men's movement is very diverse. A man who wants to join the movement has many options of just how he will explore the question, what does it mean to be a man in today's world? What do women think of the men's movement? Just as there are many different ways for men to approach the men's movement, there are many different opinions about the value and worth of the movement. Some women, especially many feminists, do not like the men's movement. They feel that it is a backlash and that it is an example of how men are trying to keep women from achieving equality by forming stronger good old boy or male-only networks and by advocating women's return to their roles of housewife and mother rather than business partner or competitor. However, some women, particularly those whose husbands are part of the men's support groups or who have gone on men's weekend retreats, are glad that men are learning to express their emotions and getting support from other men. Barbara Brotman reports in an article in the Chicago Tribune that one woman she interviewed is glad that her husband has joined the men's movement because she no longer feels that she alone is responsible for their family's emotional well-being. She and her husband now share that role and responsibility. This lecture has been only a brief introduction to some of the issues related to the men's movement. Because of many different perceptions concerning the goals and purpose of the movement, it is difficult to give a simple definition or draw a simple portrait of the movement. Perhaps it would be better to say the men's movement is like a tree with many branches and many roots. The movement is much younger than the women's movement, but in one form or another, it is beginning to have substantial impact on many men and women as they try to adapt to their changing roles in American society in the 21st century.